Hey friends, welcome back to MPL Weekly. I'm Becca Scott here with Paul Rietzel and Reed Duke. Hey fellas.
Hey, good to be here. Rubber's hitting the road now.
Yeah, sure is. This is an interesting configuration we have. Of course, Paul, we know that you are in the Hall of Fame, but we have you in the play-by-play seat just so we could give Marshall a little breather. Let him have a snack.
Yeah.
And Reed, of course, in our expert seat.
We have a real expert here in Reed Duke, so I'm excited to hear what he has to say about this. But I'm excited kind of the way the bracket has developed so far.
Speaking of the bracket, Paul, talk me through what we're seeing right here.
Yeah, so you see, Seth Manfield waiting for, the winner of PV versus Martin Juza there in the finals. Remember, the winner of this match between PV and Martin will have to beat Seth twice because Seth coming from the upper finals there. But this lower finals is huge. I mean, obviously we're seeing a bunch of Hall of Fame mirror matches, but now we're seeing a true mirror match in the Simic Nexus mirror. Reed, what is the key to that Simic Nexus mirror?
Well, this is going to be extremely non-interactive in the first game at least, and what I mean by that is both players are just looking to have a strong hand and execute their own deck's game plan.
Mm-hmm.
The only real cards that they can play to stop the opponent, something like Narset, Parter of Veils, to sort of disrupt a little bit. But basically, this is going to be fast and explosive in the sense that one player is going to get very far ahead and start taking those turns and taking advantage of the card Wilderness Reclamation, and it's going to be lights out. It's going to be pretty difficult for the opponent to claw back after that point.
Is the first person to play Wilderness Reclamation, is that really the person that has the big advantage here?
Well, it's context dependent because you want to pair the Wilderness Reclamation with some way to take advantage of that mana, like a flip Search for Azcanta or Chemist's Insight drawn from Dreams, whatever it might be. But that is probably the single most important card. That's the card to look for, the card you really want to have in your opening hand.
Would you say Drawn from Dreams is a slight advantage of a card because you get to go through your deck, especially if there is an Narset on the other side of the board, you get to go through it a little quicker? That's
actually a great question, Becca. I'm glad you brought that one up, and I don't know the answer because both have pros and cons. The main thing that's super appealing about Chemist's Insight in this matchup is that you can cast it sort of at lightning speed, with the Wilderness Reclamation being an instant, being able to get the jump start when you have all that extra mana available to you. But as you pointed out, Drawn from Dreams just digs you to your important cards at such a faster, more efficient rate. I think I'm going to give the very, very slight nod to Juza and the Drawn from Dreams player in this particular case, but that's actually something I want to keep an eye on as we watch this match.
All right, so let's see our head-to-head here. These two Hall of Fame players facing off in our lower bracket here to stay in the tournament. PVDDR, Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa on Simic Nexus, as well as Martin Juza. And Paulo Vitor, one of the best of all time. I mean, look at those top finishes.
Yeah, one of the best of all time. I mean, Seth Manfield said this is the most accomplished player in the MPL, in this particular season. Martin Juza, obviously, an excellent player as well. You have a lot of experience. We both do playing against these types. Is there anything you can do in this matchup in terms of the actual play? I mean, obviously, post-Sideboard, you're going to have things like Counter Magic and then Veil of Summer potentially if you want to play that game. But is it really just about the mulligan decisions and then those early turn sequencing?
So this is going to be a matchup that I think it could, but it's not very likely to run on thin margins. I think the games are going to be maybe not that close. One player with a good draw on the play is going to run away with things, and there's not that much, a player on the draw with a slower hand is going to be able to do to stop that. However, these players are going to be really, really precise and careful in the way that they sequence and navigate and make these tough choices, trying to really squeeze every drop of juice out of the lemon, so to speak, and make sure they're not leaving anything on the table. So while we may see lopsided games, we are also going to see very, very high level of precision, level of skill, level of play.
And there's Seth Manfield sitting at home waiting for a Nexus opponent who he just dispatched earlier on in the upper bracket. So he's kind of sitting pretty right now.
Right, and Seth did predict that a Simic deck would be heading his way, given the fact that it was 50% of the field anyway, but he was right about that. Now, we do have our little game here called Keep or Mulligan. We've got a couple. So I want to know, let's see. We are Juza on the Simic Nexus. Of course, they're both Simic Nexus against Paulo, and we're on the play. So, gentlemen, keep or mulligan?
Yeah, Reed. I mean, you see, obviously, Root Snare, not a very strong card, but Search for Azcanta, one of the most important cards to get out there early. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I'm seeing a bit of a pattern with these keep or mulligan hands. We had a round of them last time. anytime you give me turn 2 Search for Azcanta on the play, I'm pretty much going to keep it, like maybe not completely regardless of my other 4 cards, but that is just the start that I want. I want both my colors of mana. I want turn 2 Search for Azcanta or Growth Spiral. That's really the key to me being happy with my opening hand when I'm playing Nexus. And the rest can fall into place. This one I think is definitely a keep, given that you have the rest of your lands lined up, and the Search for Azcanta can filter your draw steps to try to find you that Tamiyo or Wilderness Reclamation.
All right, let's go to our second hand here. Ooh, another Search for Azcanta, but no lands.
So yeah, so this one, the stipulation is that we're on the draw, which means we're gonna have 2 draw steps plus a scry to try to find our second land untapped, and failing that we have an opt. So I'm thinking there's not that much of a fail rate with this hand. I'm gonna be able to find my second land. The question is, how much effort am I gonna be willing to put in order to find my land drop? So Growth Spiral, one of the best cards I mentioned to have in your opening hand, not so appealing in a hand like this where I'm gonna have to use my scries, my ops, tap my mana, just to try to find lands off the top of my library. It's not like I'm gonna get a clean turn 3 Tamiyo with this hand that often.
And if you're sitting there in Juza's seat and knowing that your opponent, Paulo, is using something like Chemister's Insight, is given that this is sort of a slow hand, is having access to something like Narset something you're thinking about, given that there is no reclamation, no Nexus here, you're not going to be comboing off very quickly. So are you thinking about the defensive aspect of Narset preventing your opponent from doing things?
I am. I think Narset's quite a strong card in the matchup, particularly from Juza's side. However, the number one thing I'm looking for is just coming out of the gates fast and getting my mana underneath me and getting to 4 mana before my opponent can. And you know, I don't even know what turn I'm going to be deploying the Narset with this hand, right? Because I'm going to have to really focus on finding my land drops, and Narset's not great at that job. So there's a lot to think about. This is one of the more challenging keeper mulligans that we've seen. I think I'm going to keep it. I think I'm going to keep it on the strength of the card filtering and the Search for Azcanta, but this is a real dubious one.
And before the next one, Paul, quick, keeper mulligan.
You know me, I'm not never mulliganing a hand in my life, so this is probably why I can't play decks like Simic Nexus. I would keep as well.
On the line, but it's a keeper. Let's see what's next. Ooh.
Now, I know Paul can relate to this, but we played for several years under the old Vancouver mulligan rule, the scry mulligan, and for decades before that with the Paris mulligan, where you didn't get any scry or any card selection when you went down to 6 cards. It's gonna take a bit of time to sort of recalibrate ourselves for this new London mulligan rule, but I think this is an example of a hand where, with the strength of the London mulligan rule, being able to see 7 cards and put your weakest one on the bottom, you could pretty much just do better with 6. You know, the strength of coming out quickly in a fast, non-interactive matchup like this, I really want to have my green mana in one of those strong turn 2 plays in either Azcanta or Growth Spiral.
Right,
Yeah,
this is
no
one of those
plays.
hands, where even if Paulo finds a forest, you know, your opponent basically needs to not have Growth Spiral, and even if you find a forest, you're still not necessarily quite going off, right? You just have the reclamation going. You could very easily see yourself in a good situation taking a few turns and then nothing, right? That could be the end of the game, so.
Sure. And let's see our final slide here. Ooh. Okay. Is there any? Oh, we've got 1 tap land there, and then the blast zone. Ooh, that's tricky. What do you do here?
So here's another one where we're on the draw with the Temple of Mystery. One factor that I didn't mention the last time, but is actually quite relevant, is if your first land is Temple of Mystery, your follow-up Temple of Mysteries and Hinterland Harbors are not entering untapped, so many of the lands in your library are still not going to facilitate turn 2 Growth Spiral. Still, I think this is one where, on the draw with my scry, I'm optimistic enough in finding a second source of colored mana and then Growth Spiral getting me off to the races that I think I'm happy enough keeping this.
Paul?
Yes, same thing, right? You're talking about trying to find one of 13 lands that can come untapped for turn 2. You have 3 shots at it. You know, I'm not a math major, but that's a pretty decent chance to find one by turn 2, at which point you actually have a pretty strong hand. And so, you know, when there's a lot of chances to have a very strong hand, I'm inclined to keep. So I'll go with the expert.
Ooh, okay, and that's why you guys are the experts. All right, thanks for walking me through your keep or mulligan. So, in the mirror, what is the deciding factor? What's the one card that what's the perfect opening hand to have?
Man, for me, again, it's those enchantments. Those are the enchantments that you're looking at. You mentioned Search for Azcanta, Reed.
Yeah, so Search for Azcanta and Wilderness Reclamation, these are the two cards to look for on the battlefield to really indicate one player starting to get ahead and amass an advantage. In terms of the opening hand, I'm really looking for Growth Spiral because, as I mentioned, this is a fast, non-interactive match. So if I lose the die roll, I'm really looking for Growth Spiral to sort of hijack the initiative there, get back on the play in terms of getting one step ahead of my opponent and get to that crucial 4th mana, as the first player to reach that finish line.
Excellent. Well, now is the time. We're ready to get into this match. We have Martin Juza and Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa, both on Simic Nexus. In just a moment. Just dealing with a little bit of the technicalities. I hope...
Yeah,
what do you see
well, one thing I wanted to point out, we talked about the games before sideboarding being very non-interactive, very kind of put the blinders up and then see what the other person's done in the first 4 turns. But after sideboard, actually, Martin has access to, 3 copies of Negate, 2 copies of Aethergust. Is that the kind of thing he might want to sideboard in, Aethergust?
Yeah, probably. Again, I'm especially when I'm going to be on the draw, I'm grasping at straws for any way
any
that I can flip the script and allow myself to have the advantage. So Aethergust, while there's a lot of cards that it misses, that it can't hit, delaying that Wilderness Reclamation for a turn, that Tamiyo can be enough of a swing to pull yourself into the lead in a close race.
And on the flip side, right, Paulo, only 1 copy of Negate, a lot of things like, Veil of Summers and Shifting Ceratops, Cerulean Drakes that are designed for a different matchup. Is Paulo maybe going to bring in some creatures? Is that something you would ever do in this kind of matchup, or is that just too wrong of a path?
The best thing about Shifting Ceratops is that it can kill a Planeswalker. However, that's the type of thing where maybe if I had used a sideboard where I had a combination of Negate and Shifting Ceratops, I could say okay, I'm going to go with this different game plan that maybe my opponent's not expecting, play a creature, protect it with a counterspell. I don't think Shifting Ceratops is going to win you the game on its own because there's not enough interaction to stop the opposing Nexus player from just comboing off. So my guess would be that neither player is going to turn to the Ceratops, but if one player does, probably it would be better on Juza's side. Sure.
Well, there's that protection from blue, but we do have the match now queued up for you, so let's get into it.
All right, so we see here Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa versus Martin Juza. Looks like a pretty decent opening hand for at least Martin here, right? We get the turn 2 Search for Azcanta that you talked about, Reed.
Sure, yeah, pretty decent might be a bit of an understatement. This is everything I was hoping for in my opening hand. Basically everything I was hoping for to start the game, except that I don't get to be on the play. But the Growth Spiral, best card you can have on the draw to get to 4th mana ahead of time. And this hand looks to me like if Juza can find Wilderness Reclamation, he is going to be all set.
So scries an island to the bottom to try to find that Wilderness Reclamation like you mentioned. Paulo takes the draw and unfortunately looks like does not have an untapped land for turn 2, so won't be able to deploy Search for Azcanta quite yet. Actually going to fire off an Opt here to dig a little bit deeper. Is this to find something like a Breeding Pool and get a smoother mana draw?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to me like... okay, put it this way. Paulo's going to cast that Opt this turn anyway, and he might be thinking, well, if I find Temple of Mystery or a different land that I can deploy rather than the Memorial to Genius, it might be to my benefit.
Great point. So Paulo actually is able to play Search for Azcanta here, but very importantly going to miss his 3rd land drop, and Martin takes the opportunity to fire off an end of turn Growth Spiral, develop his mana, and really kind of firing on all cylinders. And as you mentioned, just kind of missing the Wilderness Reclamation to really, kind of put this game away. Drawn from Dreams, kind of looming large here as a way to find it. Some good options here, but notably no Reclamation. What do you like here from this Drawn from Dreams?
Well, I'm thinking I just want to try again next turn with either the Drawn from Dreams or the Tamiyo, but potentially not both. He could also just take Opt, which actually seems a great idea because that's a cheap card that he can double spell next turn to give himself the maximum chance of finding Wilderness Reclamation. So if my goal was, let me just maximize the chance of having Wilderness Reclamation for 2 turns from now, I would take Drawn from Dreams and Opt, and I can cast them both to see 9 cards deeper.
Yeah, and Martin's seeing his opponent missing land drops, in the first couple turns. So from his perspective, he's got some time here to kind of set things up and start creating the full combo. Paulo does find a land. He finds Breeding Pool for turn 3. What does he need to do to kind of get back into this game?
He just needs his mana. That's the most important thing. He's got the Azcanta, he's got some good weapons available to him, but he does miss off that growth spiral again. Now, check out what Juza did with the Drawn from Dreams is he set himself up where he can guarantee to go growth spiral, make 2 land drops, and still cast the Drawn from Dreams. So that's the reason that he took the extra land there, was to guarantee this play where he's going to have access down to 7 mana on his... Is it only his 5th turn, 7 mana?
Yeah, and this seems to me to be a way where, again, because he's under no pressure of Paulo potentially, doing some crazy wilderness reclamation nonsense in the near future, he has the time to really kind of casually develop his board. So Paulo, search for Azcanta, still trying to find that 4th land, and he still can't find it. So unfortunately, Paulo really with limited options here to be able to develop his game plan. And really kind of Juza firing on all cylinders. He has a land drop for this turn. He's got multiple different card draw options. He could deploy Tamayo and search for Azcanta. Again, as we talked about earlier, really just missing Wilderness Reclamation to put a full lock on this game. The question is this turn, is he going to play some of those, Planeswalker and enchantment type things, or really just dig for that Reclamation, and he leads with an Opt?
So one thing that's kind of interesting is if you're new to this deck, you might be thinking, well, 7 mana, why don't I just cast my Nexus of Fate? I get to take an extra turn, and that's perfect. The thing that you're really looking for with the card Nexus of Fate, with this deck in particular, is you want to be generating an advantage each extra turn that you take.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that Martin just shook the Wilderness Reclamation in his hand. I think he may have had a slight misclick there in terms of putting the Tamayo out instead of the Wilderness Reclamation. I think this was a point where had he put the Reclamation out, he may have been able to take all the rest of the turns for the rest of the game. So you saw him shake it with his with the cursor there, and he's going to end up having to give Paulo one more turn. He does it again. Yeah. So
funny though, Paulo actually does have the blink of an eye, which could have bought him a little bit of time. If your opponent plays Wilderness Reclamation and you bounce it or get it off the battlefield before the end step trigger, then it's a bit of a wasted turn for the opponent. So I think Paul is far enough behind in this game that it's, he's grasping at straws, to use the expression we used earlier, but that is at least something that he can rely on.
Yeah, and so this is a situation where you can kind of see the door cracking open a little bit for PV. He's able to deploy his own Wilderness Reclamation. He has access to Nexus of Fate. Again, blink of an eye to defend himself. But Martin, because of all the work that he did to develop his mana base early in the game, has so much mana right now that he can kind of do all the things he wants. He can deploy 2 Wilderness Reclamations this turn if he wants.
I think that's what he's going to do. I think even with the pretty solid countermeasure of blink of an eye, I think Paulo is not going to get another turn in this game. So what's going to happen here is with 9 lands on the battlefield, even one of these Wilderness Reclamations getting removed, he's going to have access to 10 mana in his end step, plenty enough to Nexus and Opt. Next turn, the second Reclamation comes down. He has all the mana in the world, multiple activations of Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin every single turn. And if that wasn't enough, he's already got the 3 Nexus of Fate rolled up in his hand. So this is an ideal situation for Martin Juza.
And this is one of those games that we talked about, in the pregame, right? Where at this point it seems like he's just going to run away with it. And obviously there's nothing Paulo can do. He kind of fired his one bullet with the blink of an eye to try to slow down Martin from comboing off. And now it's really, it's mostly about sequencing at this point to make sure that you don't accidentally fizzle.
Yeah, mostly about, as Martin highlighted in his interview, mostly just about making sure you don't misclick and accidentally end your turn instead of using your Wilderness Reclamation mana. I think there's plenty of spots where this deck really puts you to the test in terms of using your brain power, making these choices in a precise and optimal way. This is not one of those times. I think Martin could basically spend his mana and cast his spells more or less at random, and there's no hope for PV. He's just so far ahead.
Yeah, so Paulo going to make sure that they make their dinner reservation and decides to beat a hasty retreat. We go to the sideboarding now. Again, is it really about the counter magic? Is that what the players are trying to do post sideboard?
So you saw Juza, the counter magic comes in so fast. That's the thing he's sure about. Now these marginal cards like Veil of Summer for the opposing permission, shifting Ceratops to snipe a Planeswalker, these are the things he's going to think about. But all of those interactive cards that can buy a turn or answer a key card, those are just straight into the deck.
Right, but both players' decks are filled with redundancies, right? And a lot of cards that have similar functions. They're digging for things, they're taking extra turns, very few kill conditions. And so does that make things like those few pieces of counter magic even more valuable, when it's a different angle that you can play?
I would say yes. And I'm glad you brought up the redundancy issue, because you think of maybe a control deck like what Shota Yasuoka brought, and in a deck like that, you have your small number of Dovin's Vetoes, and you're like, let me use these on the most important cards. Like, let me stop their Tamiyo or their Wilderness Reclamation, whatever you deem to be the most important threat. In this matchup, there's an additional element of the counter magic, which is tempo. So if my opponent taps 4 mana for Drawn from Dreams, I wouldn't necessarily name Drawn from Dreams as one of the key cards in the matchup, but if I can stop their 4 mana play at sorcery speed with my 2 mana and double spell and continue to progress my own game plan, that is a huge win.
Sure. Okay, so we see both players are happy with their 7, and Paulo leads with a Temple of Mystery. Both players plenty of lands in their opening hand, as well as the cantrips and a little piece of interaction in the form of Negate and Blink of an Eye, respectively. So both players look like they should be able to develop at least their manas a lot more, the mana bases, a lot more smoothly than game 1.
Yeah, now Paulo kept 5 lands, Growth Spiral, Negate, a hand that doesn't look flashy at face value. You might think, 5 lands, a little too many. I actually think that's one of the best opening hands you can have, because just making sure you get your mana underneath you is the key to the opening turns. That was Paulo's downfall in the first game. And then you mentioned Negate, which is actually only a 1-of for Paulo, being one of the most important impactful sideboard cards in the matchup.
So, decision point here for Martin Juza on turn 2. He has to decide whether to put Search for Azcanta onto the battlefield, and he does in a decision point for Paulo, who allows it to resolve. He values potentially turn 3 Tamayo over negating Search for Azcanta. So at least early, Paulo wants to be the kind of the proactive, developing his own game plan and trying to do that rather than messing with what Martin's trying to do.
I think that's somewhat of an example of what we were discussing before the game, where maybe if you're the Esper control player, you're thinking Search for Azcanta is enough of a long-term threat that I'm just going to put the kibosh on that. But I think in this matchup, you're more concerned with the tempo. You're more concerned with, let me use Negate on a card that costs a lot of mana and maybe waste one of the key turns in the mid or late game for my opponent, and use that to leverage myself into a winning position.
So this game, it's Paulo firing on all cylinders. As Tamiyo hits on Wilderness Reclamation, Paulo has access to that, the Reclamation we talked about earlier, a Veil of Summer to protect it from things like Counter Magic or Blink of an Eye, as well as Negate. So Martin's got to try to figure out now, with basically just 2 mana against the board of 4 lands and a Tamiyo, how am I going to get out of this mess, basically? And his hand does not really lend itself to catching up.
We've really seen mana development be the major story in both of these games. The Growth Spiral, the key card from Paulo's hand, and granted the top of his library has been pretty good to him, but this is why I was so thrilled with his opening position, just making sure you have your lands and the Growth Spiral, particularly on the play. He has 4 mana before Juza even has 3, and now Martin, from Martin's position, he might be thinking, okay, the card that can get me back into this is Wilderness Reclamation. Paulo's already ready with Negate, so I think we're going to see Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa pull further and further ahead in this game.
Yeah, and he leads with the Wilderness Reclamation, which we talked about being so important. Going to be some temptation, at least, for Martin to fire up this Blink of an Eye, and that might run right into the Veil of Summer that Paulo was bordered in. So, Paulo really has to like the way his seat, access to Negate, Nexus of Fate, Veil of Summer, a Chemist's Insight, which he put into his graveyard. So, a lot of good things going on for him. And every additional turn with Maya was absolutely brutal as the advantage kind of continues to cascade. So, as you said, Reed, these games end up being not that close. Interesting. So he elects the blink of an eye, the Tamayo, rather than the Wilderness Reclamation, kind of figuring that, trying to keep Paulo low on cards. But Veil of Summer, going to draw a card, give his permanence hexproof, counter the blink of an eye, and now, Paulo really has everything going here. Are we getting pretty close to calling it here, Reed?
Certainly a tremendous position for Paulo. He does not yet have Search for Azcanta, which that's sort of the combination that you look for to guarantee the Nexus player is going to win, is when they have flipped Azcanta and Wilderness Reclamation. He doesn't have that, but Tamiyo is a very close second in terms of being able to see 5 cards deeper every single turn to dig to the Nexus of Fate, or any card draw spell for that matter. So Paulo's position is, I would say it's not checkmate, but it is heavily advantaged.
Yeah, so Martin finds Nexus of Fate. He's going to dutifully play out his Wilderness Reclamation, try to do his own thing. We know Paulo, of course, waiting with a copy of Negate, which he uses right now to stop Wilderness Reclamation, and now the shields are totally down. So Paulo's going to kind of have free reign on this next turn with a Tamayo, Wilderness Reclamation fuel turn, access to Nexus of Fate, and for him now, it's really just about kind of crafting that combo and finding. You think it's Search for Azcanta is kind of the last piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, once he can get the transformed Azcanta, that's when I'm getting close to ready to call it. For now, he is, very likely he might just use Nexus of Fate this turn. He's generating pretty big advantage given the Planeswalker on the battlefield, making his land drops, everything like that. But it's not quite that position where, okay, the first Nexus is spelling the end.
Yeah. Veil of Summer is a card that we speculated both players might use. It can at least always cycle in a lot of situations, but Paulo, of course, in this game, finding just about the best possible use for it.
It looked to me like Paulo brought in Veil of Summer from his side, and Martin Juza did not bring in Veil of Summer from his side, and that's related to the difference in their deck lists. Paulo just having the 1 copy of Negate, whereas Juza has 3 Negate plus 2 Ether Gust.
And the 3 blink of an eye as well, correct? So
yep.
Yeah, a lot of different options. So interesting difference there as well. All right, so Paulo starting to go and try to take additional turns. The first Nexus of Fate happening. So again, Wilderness Reclamation plus Nexus of Fate. For those of you playing Standard over the last couple months, you certainly are used to that interaction. Finds a Narset. Can Narset do a nice impression of Search for Azcanta?
Yeah, I would say if Search for Azcanta is the best, Tamiyo is the second best, and Narset is the third best. So Paulo really assembling a nice configuration here that's going to give him a huge advantage every single turn that he can take. And again, we've seen it with this Nexus deck. Sometimes you do this sort of half combo where you chain a couple of turns and you eventually have to pass. But in this position, it's not like Juza's threatening to win when he untaps. So Paulo can just stack his hand, put a bunch of lands into play, and if he has to say go, he misses a turn of chaining Nexuses, it's not the end of the world.
Right. Even if he were to kind of fizzle out here, if you will, it's not like Martin's hand is filled with a bunch of things that will punish him for it. So for those of you who are combo players at home, this is kind of this is the dream. You've got all the lands, you've got your planeswalkers, you've got your enchantment, and you're just kind of going to town here, taking extra turns. And for those of you who like sandwiches, you'd be happy in Martin's seat as he can go make one because he may not take a turn for quite some time. So it looks like he's found some lands here. So doesn't have a Nexus of Fate yet for this turn, but again, as we mentioned, has as many different ways to try to find that copy of Nexus of Fate. So, and that's priority 1, right? First things first on each of your turns, you want to find a copy of Nexus of Fate before you start developing anything else?
Yeah, I would say so. And a little bit more flexibility from Paulo because, again, he's not going to lose if he passes the turn, so he can just look for things like Negate, Veil of Summer. The fail case, if I'm Paulo and it's looking like things are going badly for me, I'm not going to find a Nexus. My next priority is I'll just use Tamiyo -3, pick up the Negate, make sure nothing bad can happen, and sure I'll pass the turn one more time.
And now Paulo does find the Search for Azcanta that you talked about earlier, Reed, and kind of has everything going right now. Finds a couple copies of Nexus of Fate, and Martin Juza has seen enough. We will be going to Game 3. As that game, Paulo's deck really cooperated with him, finding both lands in that opening hand you mentioned with a couple key cards. So see if players adjust anything for Game 3. Is Veil of Summer something Martin might be more interested in on the play, where he can kind of develop enough mana to maybe go Wilderness Reclamation and protect it? Is that a thing, or Paulo just doesn't have enough blue cards for it to matter?
I think my answer is more towards the latter part of what you said. I think Martin has just made the decision that this is not one of his better cards in the matchup, and you can already see he's cutting Ether Gust, Blink of an Eye. These are fine cards in the matchup, so it's these sideboard cards are coming at a cost. Now, he may think that the value changes slightly on the player draw, but I think his decision is just, you know what, there's not enough, counterplay for Veil of Summer to be worthwhile.
All right, so both players kind of making those last-second changes, and just to kind of set this up for this Game 3, the loser of this game will be out, will not be the Emerald Split champion. The winner will go on to face Seth Manfield in the top finals, and will have to beat Seth Manfield's Vampires deck 2 matches in a row. So this single game here to decide the match, absolutely crucial to both players' split chances.
Now, we saw a very, very good 5-land hand last game, but that hinged very much on the presence of Growth Spiral. This hand is okay. It's a little bit reactive for my taste. I may still keep it and just hope that, you know what, the Scry for my Temple of Mystery and the Search for Escanta filtering will find me my action. It looks like Juza is very strongly considering it a mulligan.
Yeah, interesting. Martin, a man who loves to mulligan,
He
just
does love
absolutely
to mulligan.
loves to reshuffle that deck. You know, that's one that I would have had a tough time throwing back myself with
Me
the copy
too,
of Search
yeah.
for Escanta.
I would have kept that one.
And now, this is a hand that does not have any blue mana. So
One I would, rather than go to the position where I'm at 5 cards, I would keep and just hope the top card of my library is an island.
Interesting. So Tamayo's the card that he wants to put on the bottom. Had a potential to play a turn 3 Tamayo off of Growth Spiral if he found an island, but let's see what Paulo's working with. So plenty of mana, Growth Spiral, Chemist's Insight, Veil of Summer. So not very interactive, but certainly a hand that can do some things. And Martin does not find blue mana for turn 2, importantly. So neither player really, is threatening to combo off or develop an insurmountable lead that early, but Paulo obviously being the one developing his mana quicker, do you favor kind of his side early? I
do, and I think Chemist's Insight is going to be a perfect card against an opponent who's stagnating a little bit. Now you see Juza not really progressing his own game plan, not putting a lot of pressure on. He even has Negate, which is going to be not very effective against the Jumpstart instant. So I think Paulo getting ahead to the early mana advantage and having Chemist's Insight in a game that's shaping up to be a little bit slower than our first 2 games, I really, really like Paulo's position here.
So if you're Paulo in this spot and you see your opponent has no blue mana, it seems like they're not up to much. What's your thought process? How do you balance trying to get the game over with as quickly as possible with maybe trying to set up some sort of a reactive spell which can prevent your opponent from getting back into it?
In these early turns, I think it's somewhat scripted the way he wants to develop. Just focus on getting those land drops and drawing cards to whatever degree you can, stacking your hand. And so far, he hasn't had too many choices in terms of what cards he's going to put in his hand. Maybe, a couple of marginal decisions on what to take with Narset, things like that. But at this point, he's just, breathing a sigh of relief that his opponent is missing some steps.
Yeah, and unfortunately, in a day where we've had some really awesome games, looks like this is not going to be one of those awesome games, as Martin still has not, unfortunately, found any blue mana. Paulo's hand really stacked with goodies. He has access to Narset. He's got access to Nexus of Fate. Now Wilderness Reclamation entering the battlefield. So everything really kind of coming up. Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa, and really just kind of going to need to close things out here to earn a date with Seth Manfield in a rematch.
Right. We had a very close match between Seth and Paulo in the very top of our broadcast, and Paulo has spent the last several hours trying to battle back for the privilege of getting a second crack at Seth Manfield. But yeah, a player that we haven't really revisited in a while. Seth with the Vampires deck sitting pretty as the top bracket finalist. And we believe having a pretty good matchup against either of these players that might advance to face him.
Yeah, Seth's had a nap. He's had a massage. He's been sitting back, watching these people slog through these Nexus mirrors and control mirrors, casting negates and throwing them, and he's just sitting there sleeving up those 1-drops and getting ready to apply a beatdown. So All right, so Paulo, using growth spirals and some card draw spells, he's got 2 planeswalkers on the battlefield plus Wilderness Reclamation. Right about the time now where he's going to start chaining together Nexus of Fates. Martin Juza, and still no access to any blue mana, so Paulo, no fear of anything like a negate stopping him from doing anything. Really he can kind of play at his leisure. He's got backup Nexus of Fates, backup card draw, backup everything. One of those things where he could probably bury half the permanents he had in play and still be a massive favorite. So. And again, if you talked about this kind of in the pregame that these games, while there'd be a lot of sort of incremental decisions, at some point they would sort of diverge and one player would start to pull ahead and they ended up not being, that close.
Yep, so mana trouble, a key decider in losing these games, but a quick growth spiral into some kind of advantage generating permanent. Certainly a key to winning.
Yeah, and if you're Martin's on Martin's side, you really you only had one decision. It was that opening hand, right? We talked about the 6-card hand. There's a temptation to mulligan it and go to 5, but as we know, 5-card hands are not that likely to win anyway. We think that probably he gave himself his best chance keeping that 6-card hand, hoping his deck would reward him with one of many blue sources, and it just didn't cooperate. Yeah,
particularly a deck like Simic Nexus. We talked about the very best opener being 2nd land, growth spiral, 3rd land, untap, 4th land, play something. That takes a lot of resources to have access to all of that in the first 3 turns of the game, and it's a tall order on 5 cards to be able to assemble that and still have gas in the tank.
To the library.
Tamayo is having a fun time trying to find additional Nexus of Fates, which she succeeds in doing.
Yeah, so one of the things about the Collector of Tales is she diminishes the library and accelerates getting to that point where Nexus is just basically your library is very dense with Nexus of Fates. It becomes very, very easy to find them every turn off of your Azcanta or your Tamiyo Plus or your Narset Minus.
Yep. Yeah, and so mission 1 for Paulo here is to complete the game.
And victory to Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa. Oh, there he is. All right, congratulations to Paulo Vitor. Moving on to the grand finals against Seth Manfield. Wow, it's interesting in that Simic Nexus mirror, the writing appears very quickly.
Yep.
Is that right? I mean, it's obviously a slow game. You're waiting to combo, and it does take some time to set that up. But would you say it happens pretty quickly that you know where the advantage is gonna go? It doesn't swing quite as much?
I would definitely say so. And the key factor is there's just not a lot of ways to catch up once you fall behind. So that turn where you have to go like, yeah, go, miss my land drop. There's not really much you can do to undo that damage after the fact. So, a player who gets ahead against one who, like we saw in Game 3, Martin Juza, just stagnating and not be able to cast their spells on time at all, the writing's on the wall pretty quick.
In both of those games, you probably could have looked at it, and we were watching the match, and you look at it, okay, it's close, I'm not sure who's winning, they're kind of setting up, you go to the fridge, you get a Coke, you come back, and it's like, oh, this is over, you know what I mean? Even though it's not like blatantly over, it's over, and that's kind of what happened, that's what Reed said would happen, so that's why he's here.
Yeah, I'm curious, we do have a word from Paulo, so let's see what Paulo has to say about that match.
Hello, I am Paul Chion here, joined by the winner of the lower division, Paulo Vitor Damo Da Rosa. How's it going?
Hello. Good.
So that match played out a lot more straightforward than I thought it would. I mean, that was pretty quick. Is this typically how the Simic Nexus mirror goes?
I think it is. At least game 1, usually one person just goes off and the other person can't do anything. Games 2 and 3, there's more interaction. There's negates, there's the Veil of Summer, but he had some mana problems. So in the end, it was, I think a lot of the games are very fast. You could have some very long games, but it's not typical.
Right. I mean, from what it looked like, one of you guys just kind of had a lead, took advantage of it, and then the other person just really could not do anything about it.
Yeah, because everything snowballs so much.
Right. Quick question. Do you think that, your configuration was maybe slightly favored in this matchup due to having Chemisters inside over something like a Drawn from Dreams on Martin's side?
I think maybe it was better in game 1, but I think game 2 he had the edge because he has more negates than I do. I only have 1 negate. And he has Aether Gust, which deals with Reclamation, and you can't Veil of Summer. Like, if I play Reclamation and he Aether Gust, I cannot Veil of Summer that if it's on the same turn. So I think post-board he has the advantage, and pre-board, yeah, I probably would, but not by a lot because there's not a lot of interaction too. So it's just about the speed, right? The chemistry is good because you can play Reclamation and Chemistry in the same turn, but it's not like it has to keep mana up to do anything on my turn, so the Sorcery speed isn't that problematic. So I thought I was a little bit disadvantaged overall across the match.
I see. It seems like Veil of Summer is kind of one of the big additions to this deck from M20. How much of an impact has this card had in terms of just like how much better this deck got after sideboard?
Oh, so much. The card just does everything. Like, it's a card that you can bring it against discard spells and counter spells. So the only thing it doesn't stop is the Fairy, Time Raveler. That is it's one, foil. But other than that, the card is fantastic. Like, I would already be happy to play a Dispel a lot of the time, right? And it's a 1-mana Dispel that draws a card, and that they can't even, like, if they play, if there's Doving's Veto involved, it doesn't even matter. Like, Dispel wouldn't be able to counter Doving's Veto, but this card can because it's not countering it. So
yeah, when you say 1-mana Dispel that draws a card, I can see how that would make for a compelling argument to play the card.
Yeah, and it does even more than that. Sometimes they use Sorin and they sacrifice a vampire and try to deal 3 damage to you, and then you counter that and draw a card, right? It does a lot of different things. It stops Duraz and Thought Erasure and Unmoored Ego, which Dispel wouldn't. So it's a very, very good card. I don't think I would play the deck without the card.
Oh, wow. Okay, makes a lot of sense. Okay, now we've already seen this matchup once before. You already played your first match against Seth Manfield, and now you are going to be playing up against him again in the finals. What are your thoughts about the matchup going in?
I think it's a tough matchup for Nexus because the Vampire set combines pressure and disruption. So they have some very aggressive draws. Like, if you saw game 2, for example, Seth mulligan to 5 and didn't play any disruption spell, but his aggressive draw is just enough to beat me. So he wins some of these games, and he also wins some of the Duras, Noxious Grasp, Mortify games. I won game 1, I think, pretty convincingly, and I think I was close game 2. So even though I feel unfavored, I don't think it's by any means desperate.
Yeah. I guess there's a slightly bigger hill to climb, of course, because you have to win 2 matches to his 1, but it is what it is, of course. All right.
Yeah, that does make it harder.
It does. True facts. All right, Paulo. Well, you've got a lot more Magic, hopefully, to play. So best of luck in your finals against Seth Manfield.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and congrats, Paulo. We'll see what happens in the grand finals. Reed, did you hear what he said about Veil of Summer? Do you agree that this deck is not the same and not maybe as playable without that card?
I do agree. I think Veil of Summer is, this is just a game changer. I think Magic the Gathering will never be the same as it was before the printing of this card. One of the most, I think, impactful printings in recent years for not just Standard, but the Eternal formats as well. And it's a huge reason to be playing a green ramp or combo strategy right now. Towards the tail end of the last Standard season, before the printing of M20, Esper was sort of settled as the best or most well-rounded deck. A lot of weapons printed for beating Esper, and we actually saw Martin Juza dispatch Shota Yasuoka using that Veil of Summer, that shifting Ceratops, these cards off the sideboard.
And green could use the help. Sometimes it's hard to find a green deck in Constructed, especially in Standard. So players, a card like that, a pushed sideboard card that improves all of these matchups post-sideboard. I mean, Paulo mentioned all the different applications. I think green could use it.
Sure, yeah, all right, boost for green there. Now, if you missed any of the to see the round robin play that got these players to get in this bracket, you can go to magic.gg, check out these new features. Look, we have all of our Magic Pro League players right there. You can find the full roster and results from every match they played in the core split. Of course, there's actually 8 players within each division, and only 4 of them we talk about on NPL Weekly in this bracket with the new format of this split. So check it all out at magic.gg. All right, well, we're moving on to the grand finals very, very shortly. Reed, it's been great to work with you today and have you here. We're going to have Marshall back in just a few minutes. Let's go to a quick break.